Welcome to a very special breaking news edition of Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell, and I'm very grateful to have with me today my friend, Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council. Tony has just come straight from the Capitol, where he was able to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last night, speak to him again today, and was front and center for Netanyahu's address to the joint session of Congress. He has literally just come back into the studio from this address. So, Tony, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. I know it's been a whirlwind of a day, and we're really glad that you're here to hear straight from you how this has all gone.
Well, thank you, Kyle. It's great to be with you on your podcast. It's been a crazy afternoon, but I will tell you this: it was a phenomenal speech. History in the making. This is the fourth time that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has spoken to a joint session of Congress. That is a record. The only other individual to do it three times was the Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill. So quite historic, but also the message was historic and significant as he talked about essentially this battle that is taking place in the Middle East, that there currently is being identified as a battle with Hamas, but it's also Hezbollah, it's also the Houthis, which is really, they're all proxies for Iran. This is a battle against Western civilization. And as I met with him last night, made very clear, this is a battle against Judeo-Christian values, which has given freedom to millions and established democracies around the world. That's what's at stake in this battle, and that's why he came to bring a message. He's grateful for American support, but we've got to do this together. He said, give us the tools. As he finished his speech, he said, give us the tools, and we'll finish this job quickly.
I'm so glad that you were there and able to hear from him directly. In your time that you had with him yesterday evening, what was his demeanor and what was he giving you in that conversation that maybe people wouldn't have heard or seen on the news today from the coverage of his address?
Well, a couple of things, a couple of observations. One is I met with him in March. I was in Israel and Jerusalem, met with him in March, and clearly the weight of the significance of what they were facing was upon them, and the kind of the separation that had taken place with the United States. That was about 2 weeks before Iran did the direct attack on Israel. When I met with him last night, and there was about 15 of us, 15 evangelical leaders that met with him, he was very calm, confident, and I think you saw that today in his presentation before the joint session. But his message to us is a familiar message that we had in March, but I think increasingly becoming a reality to the Jewish people, and that is there are no greater allies to the Jewish state of Israel and to the Jewish people in general than Bible-believing Christians, those who understand the role of the Jewish people, the role of the Jewish state, and the fact that in Genesis chapter 12, God said, I will bless those who bless you. And as the world turns away, the rise of anti-Semitism, there's great comfort in the fact that there are those who are, as we talked about last night, people of the book who are standing with them. So this is a great opportunity for us as Bible-believing Christians. And it just doesn't mean, Kyle, this doesn't mean we agree with everything that they do. I don't agree with everything my government does. But I want to be supportive of my government, and I want to be supportive of the Israeli government, especially as they are fighting off forces of darkness that want to eradicate the Jewish people. And we know that this is not just a political, it's not just a military issue. This is a spiritual issue, and as Christians, we've got to see it that way as well.
Yeah, you were just talking on your show a few minutes ago, actually. You had a guest on talking about the fact that a significant majority of Americans polled still support the United States being a strong ally to Israel and supporting that relationship. But mainstream media has been kind of showing us a little bit of a different picture, not just in reporting on the protests that have been going on recently, but very recently, even in Netanyahu's arrival the other day here, without a sitting president of the United States or current vice president of the United States welcoming him to this country. Do you think that people understand what our friendship with Israel is right now and that strong support that still exists for Israel?
I think that was a part of the mission that the Prime Minister had today, was bringing an unfiltered message to the American people as to what is at stake. I mean, he had survivors, hostages that had been taken, those who had been attacked on October the 7th. He had members of the IDF who bravely fought to protect civilians in some of the kibbutz and other parts of Israel. So I think he humanized it. He talked about how barbaric the Hamas terrorists were. Then he went in and kind of connected the dots, that it's not just Hamas, it's not just some random terrorist. This is a very well-orchestrated effort being funded by Iran, using proxies. But then he took it a step further, Kyle. He connected it to the demonstrations here in the United States with recent reports that showed that those college campuses, and probably those that, and he made this mention today, those outside the Capitol that were burning American flags and rioting, were being funded by Iran. And so he said, Iran, and this is his words, he said, he sees these folks as useful idiots. Those standing with Iran are their useful idiots. And we have quite a few of those. And in fact, we even have some in Congress that are doing that. So I think he did connect the dots. He talked about what was at stake and the fact that Iran doesn't want just to eradicate Israel. It wants to eradicate America. Israel's first, but then they're coming after America. And so he said, if you allow us, Israel, to take them on, we're going to do the work for you. And we'll do that. Give us the tools and we'll do it. You don't have to put any boots on the ground. So I think that the Americans who were listening will walk away with a better understanding of what's at stake in this war in Israel with Hamas, with Hezbollah, and now with the Houthis, and ultimately with Iran.
The timing of his arrival seems beneficial, as this issue has kind of been sidelined recently with all of the political drama that we've had surrounding the assassination attempt against Donald Trump and the shifting of candidates on the left. Where would you say, knowing what you know, being there in DC, being an insider, having the connections and the conversations that you have every day, where would you say the United States relationship with Israel and support of Israel stands today at this moment?
Well, Kyle, I think you're absolutely right. I think this comes at a very important moment. But I will say this, it was not planned to be at this moment. This is something that's been in the works for months. I was talking with the speaker about this months ago, and there was actually an opportunity. We thought it might have happened last month, but it didn't. It just calendars. This was the only time it would happen. So you're right. It came at a time when it needed to happen because the attention has been turned away almost solely toward domestic issues, and we're not even paying attention to the international issues. And the situation in Israel has become even more intense after you've got, as he mentioned in his speech, the Houthis have attacked even into Tel Aviv, and of course they struck back. And we're just waiting to see if Iran escalates, and we now know intelligence is saying that Iran is very closely to the breakout point with being able to have the military-grade nuclear weapons that they can use. And so and he made a statement in his speech, which pay very close attention to what he says, that they're not going to let that happen. Now, what does that mean? I don't know, but he says they're not going to let it happen. So I think this comes at a time where he got very strong support on that statement from the Congress, which I think will be interpreted as the American government backing Israel in its right to defend not only Israel from Iran and potential nuclear attacks, but also the United States.
We've seen in the past that Donald Trump, in his capacity as president, 3.5 years ago, seemed to have the ability to kind of pick up the phone and handle international business pretty quickly. Now, he just had a call with Zelensky, and Zelensky is coming out singing a little bit of a different tune. What are your thoughts on what's happening internationally with these conflicts, particularly with Israel fighting Hamas currently, with the prospect of Donald Trump being in the White House again? Are things on hold to see who's going to be in the White House in January? Does it matter? What is everyone kind of saying about how these other nations are operating while we go through this presidential election with two very different options right now?
Well, I was actually meeting with the speaker yesterday and discussing this very issue from the standpoint of we're at a very vulnerable state as a nation. Because we have a president who, for obvious reasons, is taking himself out of the presidential race because of his cognitive decline. And so that raises questions: if he can't run for re-election, can he actually finish out this term with the full capabilities needed to be president of the United States at a time when really the world is on fire? And the world is on fire, Kyle, by the way, because of a lack of leadership and presence from the United States. Now, I am not one of these, even though I'm a Marine veteran, but I am not. I'm not one of the hawks that likes to see, a lot of America involved in all kinds of military actions. But I do believe in a very strong military because I believe in the motto "peace through strength." And America has been weakened both in our military, but also in our diplomatic standing in the international community, because this administration is more concerned about promoting abortion and LGBTQ in our foreign policy than anything else. It's anything but America first. So I think we're at a very vulnerable state. I think what is going to happen is America is going to have to rebuild its strength in order to be a deterrent. I do think that we could see some rogue actors taking actions between now and January when we do have, hopefully, a change in administrations. I think the reason, going back to your comments about Donald Trump, I think the reason Donald Trump has the influence he has had on foreign leaders in foreign situations is that he's unpredictable. He doesn't fit the models. And so, when you game these certain situations out based upon the different models that are there based upon personality, based upon resources, he just doesn't fit it. So I think he's kept everybody on their toes, and as a result, has kept a lot of bad things at bay. And we'll see if that has how quickly that effect, if he comes back into office, how quickly that resumes.
Well, that's leading me into my next question for you, Tony, because we have a unique situation right now. A sitting president who has fallen ill, who we haven't seen in several days, haven't heard from in even more days, has very oddly stepped down from running for re-election, yet has made statements to the fact that he will continue to serve as president. So essentially a lame duck president at this point, endorsed his vice president, who has had historically the lowest approval rating of any vice president we've ever had. And within about the next hour and a half is going to address the nation. What are you hearing he's going to say, and what do you think we're going to hear from him here shortly in that address?
I'm not sure what we're going to hear from him, but I do think the timing of his remarks are, I think, kind of intended to step on the news coming out of the Prime Minister's speech. The timing of these things are not accidental. I think the announcement on Sunday of him stepping back from the race and Kamala Harris becoming the nominee was somewhat designed to step on the Republican convention, the news coming out of the Republican convention. My speculation would be that tonight he's going to say that, he's able to do this, he's going to continue to do it, but for the good of the country, he's going to step aside and allow Kamala. She's qualified. I think that's what he's going to say. I'm going to be watching There was not much, as I was talking on the Hill today, other than this, the kind of the idea that this was politically motivated to step on the news coming out of the Prime Minister's speech. There was not much other thought given to his remarks tonight.
Well, it will sure be very interesting to see what he says. We've experienced him and even heard from his press secretary today. Everything's fine. He's doing well. He can continue to lead the country with some semblance of competency. But they've pulled the rug out from under the American people before and quite recently. So I know we'll be watching and the world will be watching. I also know what California thinks of Kamala Harris pretty clearly. What do people on the Hill think of her? What's her reputation in D.C. these days?
Well, as a senator, she actually had the most liberal record as a United States senator. Her reputation from California, obviously follows her here. I mean, she was rabidly pro-abortion. She was also, she went after, nonprofit groups trying to expose their donors to try to shut them down. So she's hostile to really free speech and expression. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think her number one issue is going to be abortion. She's going to talk about reproductive rights and abortion, and she's going to say that Republicans want to ban abortion. Well, that's not true, but I think that's what she's going to say. And here's the downside to this, Kyle, is that given where the Republicans are right now, I think they're just going to say, no, we don't want to do that. They're not going to actually show who's extreme on this issue because it's the Democrats that have actually introduced legislation and under Nancy Pelosi passed it through one of the chambers. And fortunately, the Democrats didn't have control of the Senate when she passed it through, the Women's Health Protection Act, which would literally wipe away every pro-life law in every state of the nation, including laws like parental notification. And so if you want to talk about who's extreme, it's the Democrats who want to force every taxpayer to fund abortion up until birth and no pro-life laws being allowed in the states. That's extreme. That's the Democrat position. And the Republicans have to be willing to debate on that issue. And unfortunately, I don't think they are. This could become a major problem, liability for the Republicans, because I think it'll have the potential of suppressing many of the pro-life voters because they're not hearing a way forward on the protection of human life from their candidates.
Now, you just were participating at the RNC as part of the platform committee for the Republican Party. And we had heard that there was little to no debate on any of the planks, but the platform moved forward pretty historically without some of those traditional elements or details on elements like life and marriage. Tony, what do you think does the Republican Party feel clear? Are they clear on their position on these issues, or have they just taken the strategy of leaving it broad and sort of fill in those blanks as they go in this election season? What do you think?
Well, I have had many, many conversations with those in the campaign and others leading up to this, because I'm not new to this. I've been on the platform committee 4 or 5 times. I've been a part of writing a number of platforms. And you're right in the way you described this situation. It was unprecedented in modern times that a process that usually takes 2.5 weeks. What happens is you get delegates, 2 from each state and territory. So you have 112 people, male and female from each state, come together, spend about 2.5 days. They get a draft that comes from the RNC on a platform that really covers most of the issues of concern to conservative voters. And then they kind of go through committee, they debate it, they talk about it, they amend it, they change it, they go to a full committee, do the same thing section by section. And like I said, it's a 2.5 day process. This time, it took about 2 hours. There was actually no time given to read it. And there's 2 issues here, Kyle. One is the product is inferior. It really is it doesn't say anything. It's just it's cotton candy. It's not something it's not a foundational document that's aspirational or states enduring principles, which is what a platform historically does. In addition to policy priorities for the next 4 years, you do both. That's not what this document is. It'd be fine if this were the campaign's platform, and they could have done that. But what they've done is they've taken 40 years of a Republican Party that has embraced the sanctity of human life as a major plank of the party's priorities and completely ripped it out. And what liberals and moderates couldn't do over 4 decades happened in 2 hours at this year's convention. And I think it's significant because 80% of the time, the parties over the years have followed these platforms. So they are guiding documents. So you have the substance, but then you have the process. And as you pointed out, there was no debate, no discussion, no amendments, anything but free speech. It was a silencing of those of us who wanted to support life, wanted to support Israel. The Second Amendment is actually gone, not even in this platform. And that's not the way it should operate. They violated the rules, and that's very troubling to me to have a party that actually is more than a party. I mean, could be the next administration not giving voice to those within their party, as the vice president nominee, J.D. Vance, at the convention last week said, we're the party of debating ideas. We're the party that supports free speech. Well, I want this part. I want the Republicans. I'd like both parties to be about that. That's what makes America strong and great. But that was not on display in Milwaukee at the Platform Committee.
It's so good to hear your insider perspective on all of this. And we're really grateful to you for it, because we're not able always, just as regular folks and voters, to get the real inside scoop on what's going on. So I'm so grateful to you, Tony, for sharing all of this and giving us your time today. I'm going to ask you just to leave our audience with your final thoughts on how we can all be best navigating this season right now. A lot of changes this election year, a lot of things that we weren't prepared for, no one was expecting. Yeah. What would you say to our politically basic audience, and what do we do and where do we go from here?
Well, Kyle, I would tell them the same thing I tell my listeners and viewers every day, is that we need to pray. I mean, we are living in uncharted times, and they're turbulent, they're uncertain, they're difficult, but as a follower of Christ, the Word of God makes very clear. Jesus said that, in the midst of all this, he said, I'm telling you all this so that you can have peace. And we can have peace and joy even in the midst of the most disturbing times. So we need to be praying. And by the way, I would encourage people to join me on my daily Bible study. I do a daily Bible devotional. They can be a part of that if they want to. They can just text Bible to 67742. That's Bible to 67742. Because I incorporate, as we go through the Bible, what's happening around us and help people understand what the Scripture has to say and how it applies to the world in which we live. And so we need to pray. But we need to vote. And I know some people are going to get discouraged by what they see happening. We need to vote for those candidates who are most closely aligned with truth, with biblical truth. Not going to be perfect, but we need to be able to discern those that are closest. That's why I like to see the party platforms when there was the sharp contrast. It made it pretty easy. Unfortunately, we're losing some of that contrast. And then the third thing, Kyle, we need to do is we need to stand. Regardless of what anybody else is saying or doing, we need to stand firm for truth. We need to speak truth. Common sense. We need not be afraid. We need not shrink back into the shadows and be silent. We need to pray, we need to vote, and we need to stand.
Pray, vote, and stand. Yes, sir. And Tony, I want to thank you again for being so kind to give us this much time this evening on the heels of a very long but very important day that you've just had there in DC. So thank you so much for joining me on Politically Basic today.
Glad to do it, Kyle. Always great to see you.